Hey everybody, it's Kneecap here, and in this video I'm going to be talking about Retribution Paladin trinkets in 10.1. Now unfortunately there's no definitive way to look at this right now. There's no like API out for Paladin, there's stuff's not updated on Raidbots yet, so unless you can go in and do all the coding yourself, there's no real way to try to even accurately simulate everything. But you can simulate like the dungeon trinkets and scale them up. Although it's with like season 1 gear, you can't, again, unless you go in and type everything out yourself, you can't do it with the season 2 stuff yet. So you can kind of, I'd call it educated speculation, especially with dungeon trinkets. And even with the raid trinkets, you can kind of project out based on how they interact on which ones might be good, kind of give an idea there. So let's start with the dungeon trinkets first. So we'll go through all the dungeons real quick for season 2. So Vortex Pinnacle is in there. You're going to scroll down. You're going to see there's no Trinket in Vortex Pinnacle, so you don't have to worry about that. So if you really are against Vortex Pinnacle, you shouldn't have to farm it for a Trinket at least. And then we will go to Legion. We'll go to Neltharian's Lair. Here we have the Mark of Dargrul. Now this one seems like it has some promise, but it must be tuned really bad or something. Your melee attacks have a chance to trigger a landslide, dealing physical damage to all enemies directly in front of you. It is a low amount of damage, I'll admit. It's 431 crit, which is fine. If our secondaries don't matter that much. If it was strength, it'd obviously be better. But so I think this is just more of a tuning problem. This trinket's actually quite bad right now. At least if you simulate it out. It's actually quite bad, like really, really bad. So that damage number would have to be amped up a lot, I imagine, for that to be worth it, or the internal cooldown changed, or whatever the case may be. This trinket's actually really bad. So as of right now, I would project that you would not need to worry about that trinket either. So there's 2 dungeons as of this moment. I wouldn't really think you have to worry about trinkets about. Next, we'll hit up Freehold. Go to Freehold again. You're going to see no trinket there for Retribution. Then we're going to go to the Underrot. Underrot has Vial, or Vial of Animated Blood. You might remember using this back in BFA, or back in the BFA or Legion. Yeah, back in BFA. And this one actually does not simulate very well either. So one, it gives Mastery, which is like our worst stat currently. Basically, like all the stats are somewhat equal still, right? Verse crit kind of the best, but Mastery is kind of like the last. like if you had to pick one as the best, you'd probably pick Verse. If you had to pick one as the worst, you'd probably pick Mastery. Again, that's a sign that your spec is not really designed great when that happens. But the use is gives main stat, which is good. It has a 1 minute 30 second cooldown, which of course makes it really awkward to use with your wings. So you're going to be holding it at some point, which always stinks. So that's part of it. Part of it's because it's Mastery, and part of it's probably just because it's tuned bad. But again, at current tuning, at the very current tuning, I probably wouldn't worry about that trinket either. So now we get into the actual Dragonflight dungeons, where we actually have a little bit better trinkets to work with at least. So going to Brackenhide Hollow, we have the Signal Flare. It is strength main stat, so that's usually a good sign for your trinkets for right now. Strength as your stat on the trinket is usually good. Your abilities have a chance to summon a thing in combat, and it can either do straight damage, it can do a poison, or it increases a secondary stat, which highest secondary stat. Which again, maybe it's going to be Verse, maybe it'll be crit, whatever it'll be. But it's actually, again, increasing your secondary stats is not a very powerful ability. So assuming those are 1 in 3 chances to happen, a third of the time, it's going to be pretty bad. And because of that, the trinket isn't like terrible, but it's not very good either. Again, with the current tuning, I can't imagine this would be like a trinket that you're targeting like best in slot. When we go into Halls of the Fusion, we will find the Iridius Fragment. This actually simulates terrible. Again, it's Mastery main stat, which isn't great. Increasing your strength for each time. It is a 3-minute cooldown though, so I'm guessing maybe the tuning isn't good around the 3-minute version of it or something like that. Again, the giving Mastery isn't the greatest thing either. So this also does not sim particularly well. let's now this trinket is strong in general, and it was actually pretty good before the rework because mastery was good, and it was actually a decent trinket. But as of right now, again, with tuning, do not think with current tuning, do not think that that will be one that you're clamoring after. At least when we go to Notheris, we have the Magma Mammoth scale, like strength main stat. That's a good thing. We have your attacks have a chance to cause flaming tentacles come out and hit them. Now this is actually a pretty decent trinket. Again, I don't think it's like a top-notch trinket or anything, but now we're starting to get into a realm where it might be usable in some instances. Maybe it's good for a certain case or whatever. But we're at least getting into that space where the trinket's actually kind of decent. Again, nothing special about this trinket, just decent. And then finally we get to the only dungeon trinket that currently, with current tuning on the simulation craft, that simulates somewhat pretty well, I would say, is the Homeland Raid Horn from Uldaman. It's a use as a 2-minute cooldown. Call on the Lost Wars. It does have strength as the main as its stat. Calls down a cannon, dealing fire damage split between you and all enemies over 3 seconds. So it does hit yourself, I guess, as well. Maybe it puts it on the ground and you can walk out of it or something like that. I've never actually used this trinket before, so I don't know exactly what it does. But it says it hits you too, so this could be a trinket that does damage to you. I don't know if you can avoid it or not. This one actually does simulate decently, though. Again, this is one that now you're in the case of, well, maybe this trinket is actually usable, maybe it is good. When we talk about the raid trinkets now, so basically not a lot of greatness from the dungeon there. The raid horn, again, as of right now, would be probably the only one that kind of competes with the raid trinkets. And we'll start with what's probably the best trinket, right? So it's a rare loot, very rare loot. So you might not get your hands on this ever, right? It's from the second to last boss, and it's rare loot. So it's like the shield ring from Broodmother. Like, a lot of people didn't have a mythic shield ring from Broodmother. So it's very similar to that. But this Call to Chaos is actually very, very strong for Rat. It might be so. I mean, it's very rare, so maybe they won't care. But it's quite strong. So it gives you crit, which is fine. It's one of our better stats. Crit, I'll say it again. You're either like a crit verse spec or you're a haste mastery spec. If you're crit verse spec, then you do not scale well, and it's not like you don't get a lot of benefit from your secondaries. But it is crit still, so it is good. Your area effect spells and abilities have a chance to grant you a ton of strength and increase damage you receive by 5%. So you basically get a ton of strength, and it lasts for 18 seconds, right? So it lasts quite a long time. So you get a ton of strength. It's like a cooldown, really. It's like a big cooldown. And you do take more damage while you do it. Luckily, Ret has a lot of defensive capabilities to be able to handle that damage in most cases. So it shouldn't be too big of a deal. But this is a very strong trinket. If you play with this right now on the PTR, I'm on the PTR right now. If you play with this, you will notice that it's doing quite a lot of damage. I imagine this is the best in slot trinket, as it probably should be. Second to last boss, highest item level possible, and it, is very rare loot, which is going to increase, its power there as well. Let's go find some more trinkets here. In the raid, there's a few. Find where they are. So we have this Chaos Grapnel. Again, strength is the main stat, so it has potential already. Use Hurl the Grapnel up to 20 yards, so you don't have to be 20 yards, I don't think. I think you can be next to it. To impale your target, dealing a good amount of physical damage and heaving you towards them with tremendous force. On impact, deal 111,000 volcanic damage split between all nearby enemies. Impact damage increased per enemy struck up to 5 enemies. There's a 1 minute 30-second cooldown. Now, if this is like a 3-minute cooldown amount of damage. So I have a feeling that this is actually a pretty strong trinket. Again, without testing it, without being able to simulate it, I imagine this trinket is probably pretty strong. It doesn't line up with wings or anything like that, but there's no real need for it to. It's just doing a flat amount of damage. It's kind of like, you know, in a way, it's kind of like Grief Torch. Like you don't need to use Grief Torch with your wings, although it did benefit from your crit. By no means did you need to use it in your wings. So 1 minute 30-second cooldown to do a lot of damage. As long as it scales with Verse, which most trinkets do, then I imagine this is a pretty good trinket. Probably just as good as any like the Homeland Raid Horn, and if not better than that, I'd imagine. This Chaos Grapnel. Again, the tuning could change on all the dungeon trinkets though, because a lot of them are really bad. We have the Ominous Chromatic Essence, Strength main stat, that's good. Resonate the power of your Sworn Dragonflight, giving you secondary stat. So right away, you're going to see that this is probably not going to be that good for you. As a Ret Paladin, you don't really care that much about your secondary stats. They're not very strong, unfortunately. So compared to other trinkets, it's probably going to be on the weaker end. So this is probably not one, again, unless it's brokenly tuned, this is not going to be one that is that relevant for you. And then I think we just have one more here. The Elementium Pocket Anvil. This one has a lot of promise as well. So Strength main stat, or as the stat again. Sharpen your weapon with Elementium, giving your Crusader Strike, Crusading Strikes, and Templar Strikes. So all of those abilities that are all one ability, basically, choose. A chance to deal 30,000 additional Shadow Flame damage on hit. Now, I don't know what the chance on hit is of that, but it's I've seen some logs of this, of the Pocket Anvil. It does seem to be pretty strong. Hard to say where I would rank it as far as these. Probably close to the Grapnel, if not higher than the Grapnel. So it could be like maybe your second or third best possible trinket, at least for single target. So it's definitely interesting. Now, if it can also cleave with your Templar Strikes, and that's maybe even really good for cleave and AoE as well. Use strike your weapon against the anvil to strengthen it further, dealing Shadow Flame damage to enemies, to nearby enemies, and increasing the on damage by 20% shortly after leaving combat. Stacks 5 times. 1 minute cooldown. You can also use it with wings every single time. That's actually really, really powerful. So I imagine this Pocket Anvil is very strong. I know the Notharian's Call is very strong, and I think the Grapnel is probably pretty strong as well, although that is purely speculation. So we have 3 solid raid trinkets. I imagine, and maybe like 2, maybe both best in slot currently would be from raid. Again, we could see lots of tuning on the dungeon trinkets. I don't imagine they're all going to be terrible, but of course some of them are just terrible for Ret because, again, they have mastery as their stat, or they give you a secondary stat. That doesn't mean the trinket's terrible. It could be really good for a different spec or class, but it just means it's not the best for Ret specifically. So yeah, I was just kind of, you know, I'm not someone who makes the code for the, or the API for the for Ret Paladins or anything like that. So when I do this stuff, I have to kind of go off based on my own knowledge and stuff like that. But I have been, you know, hunkering for some information, and unfortunately I have to stand on the shoulders of legends, of giants, waiting for them to put out actual you know, stuff for me to use, right? The API for me to use, and then I can figure stuff out more from there. But it is nice to have a general idea. Basically, with current tuning, you're going to want to be a raider, I would say, for your trinkets. Or also likely is that they will tune some of these dungeon trinkets to be a little bit more viable. Now, they typically do not tune something that's like low end to make it the best. They haven't necessarily done that. So it would be like if they buff that raid horn from Uldaman, like that, you could see that maybe being one of your best in slot, either for single target, AoE, whatever. You could see maybe the horn from Uldaman becoming one of your better ones if it got like a buff or something like that. And it still isn't. It's not a terrible trinket. Like the Notharian's Call is extremely strong. It's like Grief Torch strong, right? That's a very strong trinket. The raid horn from Uldaman is like, you know, it's substantially weaker than like a Grief Torch would be, right? It's like if I had to put it, it's like 25% weaker or something like that than a Grief Torch. Would probably be about where it's at, about 25% ish, maybe even 30%, whatever. But somewhere around there, it's weaker than a Grief Torch is at like the same item level. So whereas the Notharian's Call is actually quite strong. I don't know where that would be exactly compared to Grief Torch, not being able to simulate it properly, but it's quite strong, and I imagine it's pretty close to it, if not higher than it, because it is so strong. And of course, Grief Torch gets stronger and more people die. If people aren't dying, Grief Torch loses some of its potency as well. So if nobody, whereas a regular trinket, you don't have to worry about somebody dying to be able to use it more. So it also increases power during like a clean run or whatever. But yeah, that's it for this one. I will probably be on the PTR more for the rest of the week because there's really nothing else to do. Maybe I'll hop into some Mythic Plus and actually test some of these trinkets out that I can grab here from the trinket guy. I think he only has the raid trinkets to grab, which is fine because you can simulate the dungeon trinkets, like I said. So maybe I can test them out that way, just complete manually and see how they do and figure some stuff out from there. But I just wanted to give just some general idea of where trinkets are right now. I expect we'll see some pretty big tuning on the dungeon trinkets would be my guess. And maybe they are tuned and they just aren't updated on like raid bots or whatever. I'm not sure on that, but as of right now, they seem to be a little bit weak compared to the season 1 trinkets. So that's it for this one. As always, I do ask you to please subscribe to the channel. Helps me out a lot. And other than that, everybody have a good one.